It was a quiet afternoon when a clever citizen found himself face to face with a cop who thought he had all the authority in the world. The officer, brimming with confidence and a sense of control, approached the man with a list of directives that seemed more about flexing power than following the rules. But this wasn't just any ordinary citizen. Calm, composed, and clearly well-versed in his rights, he listened carefully before turning the situation on its head. What started as an attempt to intimidate quickly spiraled into an eye-opening moment for the officer, as the citizen's clever responses revealed the gaps in his approach. The tension between them grew with every word exchanged, and bystanders couldn't help but watch. The question is, how does someone stay so calm under pressure and flip the script so effortlessly? This showdown has a lesson for everyone. Stay tuned to see how it unfolds. The cop had been patrolling the neighborhood for hours, feeling more like a small-town sheriff than someone just doing their job. He had a reputation for being tough, quick to issue tickets, and even quicker to bark orders. The citizen, on the other hand, had lived in the area for years. He knew his rights, he knew the law, and most importantly, he wasn't afraid to stand up for himself when something didn't sit right. It started with a simple traffic stop, just routine, or so the officer thought. But as soon as the man rolled down his window and the officer began speaking, something didn't feel right. The citizen's calm demeanor and sharp questions caught the officer off guard. What should have been a quick exchange turned into something much deeper. Why was the officer pushing so hard for certain answers? And why did the citizen seem so prepared, almost like he knew this moment was coming? As the officer leaned in, his voice dropped a little lower, trying to assert more authority. "I need to see your license and registration," he demanded. The citizen, unfazed, met his gaze without hesitation. His fingers moved slowly but deliberately to retrieve the documents, taking extra care to make a show of doing things by the book. He handed them over, but instead of just waiting quietly, he asked, "Is there a specific reason you stopped me today, officer?" The cop's eyes narrowed. He was used to people giving in without question, but this man wasn't backing down. "You were speeding," the officer said, though his tone wavered. The citizen raised an eyebrow, his calmness almost unnerving. "Are you sure? Because the speed limit here is clearly posted, and I've been driving exactly within it." The officer shifted uncomfortably. A few seconds passed, and the street behind them felt unusually quiet. Passers-by had started to gather, sensing the tension, but no one dared to interrupt. The citizen continued, his voice steady but firm. "You've got no right." The citizen didn't budge. He looked the officer straight in the eyes, his voice dropping, almost a whisper. "You know, you're not the only one with a badge. I've seen how this plays out too many times." There was something in his words, something that made the officer's blood run cold. Was this man a cop? A lawyer? Someone who had experienced this system from a different side? The officer couldn't tell, but the doubt lingered in his mind. The crowd had fallen silent. Even the distant hum of traffic seemed to fade into the background. It was just the officer, the citizen, and the moment hanging in the air, each word building towards something inevitable. Could the officer hold on to the power he thought he had? Or was this going to be a moment that changed everything? For a moment, the officer stood frozen, trying to process the citizen's cryptic words. The idea that this man might know more than he let on made the cop second-guess everything. "What are you saying?" he asked, his voice faltering just slightly. The citizen tilted his head, his calm expression never wavering. "I'm saying that sometimes it's better to know who you're dealing with before making assumptions." Before the officer could respond, the man reached into his glove compartment, not quickly, but with deliberate precision. The officer instinctively tensed, his hand moving to his holster. but the citizen paused and raised his free hand. "Relax. It's just paperwork," he said, his voice still cool, though his eyes carried a glimmer of something the officer couldn't quite read. Was it confidence or a quiet warning? He pulled out a neatly folded sheet of paper and held it up for the officer to see. "This," the man said, unfolding it slowly, "is a certified notice of my rights under state law. It's something I carry just for moments like this." The officer blinked, his jaw tightening. The paper detailed specific legal codes, rights to decline searches without probable cause, and a line that stood out. Asterisk misuse of authority will result in legal action asterisk. The cop's grip on his belt tightened as he scanned the document, the crowd inching closer now, their murmurs growing louder. But just as the officer began to speak, a voice called out from the gathering audience. "Hey, isn't that the guy from the news last month? The one who won that case against the city?" All eyes turned to the citizen, who let a small, knowing smile slip. The officer's stomach dropped. If this man was who they said he was, this wasn't just an ordinary traffic stop. It was "I was asking for answers," the citizen interrupted, his voice unwavering. "And I've got a right to do that. But it seems like someone here might need a little reminder about what the law really says." The superior officer's eyes narrowed as he glanced at the paper the citizen still held. He didn't say a word at first, just studied it carefully. Then, in an unexpected twist, the superior officer stepped forward, holding out his hand to the citizen. "I'm sorry about the confusion," he said, his voice suddenly much more respectful than the first officer's had been. "It looks like this situation's been blown out of proportion. I'm going to make sure this is handled properly." The crowd stood in stunned silence. The first officer's jaw tightened in disbelief. The man he had tried to intimidate had, in a matter of minutes, turned the whole situation around, and now even his own superior was on the side of the citizen. The power shift was complete. But just as the superior was about to escort the citizen away, he turned back toward the first officer, his gaze hardening. "You'll be hearing from internal affairs about this. It's not over yet." The crowd erupted into a low buzz as the citizen nodded once and walked away, leaving the first officer standing there, his reputation in tatters. The officer's mind raced as the reality of the situation sank in. He had been so sure of his position, so certain of his authority, but now he was the one exposed. As the crowd slowly began to disperse, the first officer couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was just the beginning. Something told him that the citizen wasn't done yet, and neither was the truth that had been hidden for so long. As the citizen walked away, the air felt lighter, the tension replaced by murmurs of disbelief and quiet admiration. Some in the crowd stayed behind, still talking about what they had just witnessed. The officer, left standing alone, looked at the ground, his mind spinning with what had just unfolded. His authority, once so certain, had been shattered by a man who simply stood his ground and knew his rights. For the citizen, it wasn't about proving superiority or winning an argument. It was about accountability. He had faced situations like this before, and each time, his goal was the same: to remind those in power that respect and fairness go hand in hand with authority. As he reached his car and opened the door, he glanced back at the officer one last time, offering a nod, not of defiance, but of understanding. Then he drove away, leaving a lesson that everyone present wouldn't soon forget.